Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this very exciting launch of our new research, the Global Perspective of Student Accommodation. Big special thanks to our partners, University Living, who have supported us in the data, and Yugo for being our main partner, without which we wouldn't be here today. So a really big thank you to you guys for supporting us.
We did a big piece of research in 2022, which many of you might have been involved in and read. And it was about what Gen Z want from their student accommodation. But the majority of the responses came from a domestic audience. So we were asked from quite a lot of people if we could provide insight from international students. And when we were looking for partners to support us with this, Yugo were the obvious choice. With their variety of student accommodation across the globe, we knew we could rely on them to provide their unique experience and knowledge. With buildings in multiple continents, we were able to tap into their database to bring the international perspective to the results.
And with University Living, we'd been looking for a project to collaborate on for a while. And when this idea came about and the opportunity came along, they were just a perfect fit for working with us on this data set. So together with both Yugo's database and University Living's database, we've been able to survey 2,000 global students, 60% of that coming from the University Living database and 40% coming from Yugo. Just so you're aware, for the purpose of this report and this webinar, when we talk about an international student, we're talking about a student who is living away from home, from their home country, and a domestic student is those studying in the country that they were born and grew up in.
So along with representatives from our partners, Joe Persechino from Yugo and Saurabh from University Living, we also welcome Martijn van der Veen from ICEF, Robin Walsh from Bournemouth University, and Simeon Anyalemechi representing the student voice as the President and Chair of Trustees from Salford Students' Union. Sadly, Rebecca O'Hare was unable to join us today as she's got called away to important student business at Leeds. So big thank you to Robin for stepping in last minute to ensure we had the university perspective in this session. Please can we ask our panel to introduce themselves and also to share with us what it was about the international student landscape that attracted you to be part of this report and webinar. Let's start with you, Joe.
Thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. I'm Joe, I'm the COO of Yugo. It's pretty much the class-leading global student operator and brand globally for students, and we are operational in around 9 countries and over 110 properties. And the opportunity to be able to talk on this webinar and to be part of the report is absolutely fascinating for us, as data is king, and the more we can learn from our students about what they want and what they need, that will certainly help us in terms of the types of properties that are built in the future, but also how that can dictate the service that we provide to those students. So really excited to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Joe. Saurabh, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks everyone, and look forward for a insightful learning session, with all the great stalwarts of this industry. I guess I'm the most rookie in the ecosystem. So it's been 12 years been doing this. Love this to the core. For my international student to someone who is trying to help international students with their accommodation, been breathing, eating, and literally sleeping student accommodation all across the globe. So can't be more happy to be part of this this panel. And been doing this for last 12 years. We realized that everyone is talking. We can do this, we should do this, but most of us need to take decisions, and that's where the data and these reports and these sessions are important. So thank you to Sarah and all the awesome work you've been doing of going out of the way, literally walking the talk, going to each cities, meeting property managers, speaking with platforms, speaking with students, and putting across students insights as well as what exactly is needed. Do we need those fancy cinema halls, or do we need extra 1 square meter in the room? And both are important, but if we have data points which can help take decisions, I believe, so that's what make me excited to be part of this event and being data partner for Sarah and Deenie. I can't forget Sarah. When we started early on, Sarah, one of the very early supporter of University Living, and it's been, a topsy-turvy journey for marketplace, wherein, from a one country destination to probably 12 countries all across the globe, from providing PBSA to homestays, from providing short-term to long-term. I mean, love the journey, and thank you for being part of that journey, Sarah and Deenie. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Saurabh. That's very kind of you. Simeon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Lovely to meet you all. My name is Simeon. I'm an international student myself, originally from Nigeria, a returning sabbatical officer. I was business and law officer last year, but returned this year as president of the Salford Students Union. I've been a huge advocate for international students, especially towards inclusion of international students. And yeah, what attracted me to this important project is we all know that universities are really ambitious towards recruitment of international students, given the contribution to university finances. However, not much thought is being put into planning for them, especially given their unique circumstances and given that they've traveled far to come study here in the UK. The baseline for their experience is normally normally the planning done for home students, but in reality, that's not sufficient and does not meet their expectations. This is why I'm really impressed with this research. I wanted to get involved to share my views on the findings based on my personal experience, my experience as president of the Salford Students Union. Thank you, and lovely to meet you all once more.
Thank you, Simeon. Let's go to Martijn now. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah and Deenie. Lovely to be here and be surrounded by such professionals in accommodation and international education. I think that, ICEF is one of the leaders in international student recruitment. So we provide publications on what's happening in the market, but we're also very well known for our B2B networking events, where we bring together the education providers who recruit international students and connect them with any organization that can help them do that, and with anything around that, which of course includes accommodation. We have an event on that topic coming up in London, where you'll be there as well, Sarah and Deenie. But technically anything that involves international students and accommodation has my interest. And what I really liked about your report and your approach is that you are looking at students as individuals rather than a bunch of numbers and statistics. Because in our sector, the student recruitment industry, the focus is always on the students' individual needs and interests in terms of their study and their career opportunities and their ambitions. And I believe that we should also be more aware of the students' individual needs and desires in terms of student accommodation, their home away from home. And I feel that your report is an important ingredient to help us be more aware of those individual needs. So thanks also for putting that report together and for putting this webinar together on such an important topic. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, definitely not least, Robin.
Thank you. So I'm stepping in here sort of kind of at the last minute for Rebecca, but hopefully I'll be able to fill her large boots. I was coming along anyway, so really interested in this topic. So I was going to be in the audience listening to the conversation. So I'm really pleased to be able to sort of be on the panel and be a part of the conversation. I've worked in the sector for over 20 years now for universities and for private PBSA organisations, currently at Bournemouth University, but I also sit on the Yugo executive board. They're lead for housing codes and standards. So for people that don't know Yugo, they are a membership organisation for the sort of university services, the sort of commercial services, income generating that are non-academic. So things like retail, catering, conferencing, sport, and then accommodation. Accommodation obviously is a really important part of what we do to support our members. We've got 118 members, 118 institutions as members of Yugo. I think let's get into the conversation and see where we go.
Great, and thank you everyone. And I'm sure the audience will agree we've got an amazing panel, a lot of expertise, and we really appreciate you being with us today and joining us. Before we begin the discussion, we did just want to share some stats around those who responded to the survey. As just by signing up to this webinar, you will all receive an email into your inbox shortly after this with the actual report. But just so you've got a bit of a headline kind of findings about who has responded. We had of the 2,000 respondents, 40% of them were male, 57% female, 1% non-binary and 2% preferred not to say. 55% of those that responded were studying away from their home nation and 45% studying in their own country. 25% of all the respondents were Indian, with 49% studying in the UK. They're all currently living in different settings, with 47% in a room with shared facilities, 18% in a private apartment with no shared facilities, 4% share a room, 24% in a shared house or apartment, and 5% are living in a house they own or with their family.
As Deenie said, the valued audience, you'll all receive the report after the webinar. We are keen to get the data in front of as many people as possible, so please share it far and wide. However, it's a rather big document, so we'd prefer it if you didn't print it. So without further ado, we will begin our discussion on the global perspective of student accommodation for international students. If you've got any questions, please use the Q&A facility on your screen, as we will keep an eye on this, and we won't be keeping an eye on comments until the end. So let's start the discussion.
So do you think the accommodation sector thus far has considered the needs of individual cohorts and their specific lifestyles, demands and budgets? This is about the segmentations of students rather than looking at them as one body. Who would like to start?
I can start if you
Martijn?
want. Yeah, to be honest, I actually do believe that the accommodation sector itself does provide a wide range of different housing formats and solutions, but we have to ask ourselves to what level the accommodation sector can and should be considering each student's specific lifestyle and demand. I would argue that this is more of a joint responsibility, not just of the accommodation providers, but also and especially of the education providers, the study abroad agencies, and of course of the students themselves to find that destination, that school program, and of course of accommodation that together as a mix provide access to their different individual needs. I just think of amenities like a gym, washing facilities, quiet study spaces, a lot of these things that came in that I saw in your report, areas for social interaction, entertainment, prayer facilities. A lot of these are provided also by the institution, the school, the municipality, the local library, perhaps. They can be found in the city center. So, to answer that question, I do feel that the accommodation sector in many cases does have an answer to the needs of individual students, but it all comes down to price, and many of those can be satisfied outside of the accommodation that is available.
Yeah. Can I go?
Yes, sir.
So first of all, thank you. I mean, again, I feel so blessed and fortunate to have a model which is by design and by choice, have the opportunity to, provide what students want. We are no one to tell that, okay, this is what you want to book. We always say that, okay, these are the options, take informed decisions. By virtue of that, at least, we are fortunate, even if we have studios, so we can give a student a studios, a private room or a homestay, depending upon their location, price point, whatever they look for, right? So segmentation is very important. And in fact, one of the reasons this sector has been doing well in spite and despite of COVID, inflations and depressions in last 15, 20 years, because we've been as an ecosystem, been listening to students and universities, right? So segmentation is important, and we've been doing it as an ecosystem, and webinars and reports, surveys like this ensure that we've been listening to the core. We are not listening only one side of the ecosystem. If we if we listen for investors, of course, we all need to have studios because that gives the best ROI. If we look for university partners, they need most of the private rooms, as price point or budget that can be, and it's still walking distance to universities. Not possible in this era and ecosystem. So with these segmentation surveys, we all can listen to everyone, and eventually we always say that we are happy only and only if students are happy. As I mentioned, that it's not the market which is what available, but it's always been run by a market what is needed. So sooner or later in this market, if some investors are pushing studios, but if it's not budgeted in the right location, it will not be filled. So they are forced to, look out for option which is used by the students and universities. So yeah, I mean, this is a market which is run by demand, then by the supply.
And Robin, I guess from your point of view, back to Martijn's point, I think what Martijn's saying is that it's not just about accommodation. You have to look at the whole ecosystem. And I guess probably that's quite true in Bournemouth because you rely on external providers for your accommodation. And also it's quite spread out amongst the city. So I guess how much should the students' needs be met through just accommodation?
I think from an accommodation point of view, it's it depends on, it really depends on the, picking up on Saurabh's point around about demand. And, my view is, I don't think it's by design that we are offering any sort of consideration for the individual, going back to your question about the individual sort of needs and cohorts of these particular different types of students. I don't think anybody's actually doing that by design. I think that what is driving this and what's driving the bulk of the accommodation offer is it is about return on investment, and it is a profit making business, and that's what it is. You put the cards on the table. That's what private PBSA is, and universities rely on that, because without private PBSA they wouldn't be able to have got to the stage where they are now with regards to recruitment. Now I think that maybe, this is becoming more of a topical issue right now, because potentially, people have talked about sort of price tipping points for many years. And maybe we're getting to that point now where actually for certain cohorts of students, and we know that, we've got Simeon here from Nigeria, and I'm sure he can talk from that point of view. There are different cohorts of students who come from different parts of the world who have very different levels of sort of budgets, which means they have very different options, and they're going to be looking for different types of accommodation. If there were the options out there, we wouldn't be having this conversation, I don't think, because there wouldn't be any issues. That we're having this conversation shows that there's a problem, and I would challenge and throw it out there that the problem is price. Now, how you deal with that is that's the golden ticket, isn't it? Nobody knows right now. Everyone's talking about, there's this, what I see now happening in the market is that since COVID, everyone talks about sort of pre and post COVID. No one was doing anything post COVID because, inflation's running high. Everyone's sitting on their money, everyone's sitting on their hands, watching and seeing what's going to happen to the market. Things are starting to ease up now that inflation's coming down, and you are starting to see interest coming back into the market. However, that interest that's coming back into the market is still on the pre-COVID model of what Saurabh's talking about. It's that classic, mostly en suites with some studios. And that still seems to be the model. And that's probably because that's the model that investors understand, and that's the easy one to sell to funds. But actually, it's not what students need. It's not what universities need either. And ultimately, I don't think in the long term, it's not what private companies need, because you obviously need to, you need to provide a product that students want. And I think that's the demand, that the landscape of students has changed now, and it's changed. Maybe, again, it's just a thought, is that it's changed and we've not realised it's changed, and we don't really understand the extent of how it's changed. So, we're here having this conversation now, which is a good thing.
Let's bring Simeon in, because I'm sure based on that, Robin, what's your view from a student perspective? You mentioned in your introduction that you feel like sometimes international students are maybe not considered as any different to domestic home students. How far should accommodation go with segmentation?
Thanks, Sarah. And yes, I completely agree with Robin that at the moment, it's about return on investment. There's a demand and supply issue, and that takes away the core focus of the experience students are supposed to get out of accommodation. And for me, this is the first research I've come across that segments, a minority that's most often forgotten, and that's international students. Accommodations are mainly designed, with the core focus on profits? Is it making profits and all that? So early this year, I was on a trip to Europe on a 1K trip. We visited over 15 organizations across the Baltics and Finland, and I was quite impressed with the research-driven approach taken by one of the organizations we visited called HOAS. HOAS is a housing accommodation originally founded by 16 students, but currently worth over 429 million, worth over 587 million as its balance sheet, and has a turnover of over 82 million. So the government is subsidizing this scheme, but one thing that's intriguing about it is the inclusivity by design, like how they include students in the design, how they consider the diversity of their student population, and how it's done with and for the students. So maybe if we solve the demand and supply issue, then I'm confident that this important piece of work would inform, decisions of universities and housing providers.
Thank you. That's really interesting. We'll look those up. That sounds really interesting. I guess, Joe, nothing really exemplifies segmentation of different nationalities than the Yugo product, because you don't have the same product all across the globe. I know that personally. I used to work with you at Yugo. There's not one product that's the same in every country, because you've been able to kind of look at the individual needs in each country.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. And when we use the segmentation word, I think we need to be careful that we're here to be inclusive for all students, as everyone on this panel is. We want to ensure that all students are served, catered for, and have somewhere to live that's appropriate for them and for their needs. And I think that the difficulty we have as an industry is that when you start to segment, it's not an easy thing to do. You'll know yourself, Sarah, been in the industry a long time, that way back when the first sort of internationals that started to flourish and come through were traditionally regarded as the Chinese. They were wealthy, so suddenly you were catering for that high wealth Chinese cohort. Then we've seen the rise of the middle classes from Asia, and then now we're seeing the working classes rise through. So you look at the international students and the stats and where they're coming from, and those numbers are changing. We've seen, Saurabh will attest to this, that India is growing exponentially versus China in terms of student numbers each year. But now you're seeing Vietnamese, Indonesian, African students that are, there's more and more coming through the system. And so to segment to a particular type of student is very difficult, because you can't just say that all Indian students want cheap rooms, non-ensuite, bunk beds, for example, versus Chinese who only want studios. It's not as simple as that. So you throw that into the mix, and it makes it very, very difficult to be able to build something and operate something for everybody, because the needs are always changing. And, put on top of that, layer on top of that, you've got Gen Z will be moving into Gen AI in the next 4 years. What are their needs going to be? And if you're building today, and then it won't be open for another 3 or 4 years, potentially your room mix is already out of date, or your service offering is out of date. So we've got to be really mindful about the key themes that you pull out from what students want, to be able to build something that is as close to what they want, whilst obviously being profitable, like Robin's mentioned, but enabling a true offering for everyone. I think it's very difficult. And the biggest thing that certainly I want to avoid is that you create one type of housing or student housing for a particular cohort, and then suddenly you've almost, I don't know if you're attracting Indian students or Chinese students, and suddenly your whole building becomes populated by those Asians or Indian students. The whole point, well, I think that, a large part of being an international student is that you want to immerse yourself in the culture and the community of a different country. And I'm not sure that putting all Indian students into one building, for example, is really going to encourage that. And, certainly at Yugo, we want to, we've been pushing through our pillars that we have to ensure that we get that connectivity between different cultures, between students from different countries, to to ensure that that mixing happens, because that's part of the journey, isn't it, of life, and being able to understand different cultures and where people are from, and making new friends cross borders. So I think we need to be careful about segmentation and how we actually apply that in real life.
Come in, if that's okay. Just some thoughts. I thought that I think you're right, Joe. I mean, I couldn't agree more, Joe, about sort of you know, social kind of engineering. I can't be more against that. You know, I think that yeah, students, as part of their student experience, it should be about sort of, you know, additional to their kind of academic. It's about broadening the experience and meeting people that that you're never going to kind of probably meet that broader range of people anywhere else, you know, even within the workplace. So that's a really important part, and I agree with that part. I think that I think the key thing here is that this is not a problem, that it's not PBSA's problem to solve. You know, private PBSA are limited to what they can do to increase the supply of a broader range of accommodation. You know, the UK itself is struggling, you know, across all tenant classes. You know, the students are just one, and actually PBSA is all, you know, it would be really interesting. We've talked about this over many years. It'd be really interesting for somebody to come up with a different type of model for PBSA that could, you know, could offer a broader ladder of rents within a property, you know. So it could be more appealing to students who are on a tighter budget, who could have that PBSA experience and all the great things that Joe has talked about that you get within PBSA, because it's a fantastic product, and a lot of students love it. But because of the model, the kind of commercial model of PBSA, it's not going to be for every type of student. So rather than thinking about having the conversation around sort of different cohorts of students around the different nationalities model, this is about kind of budgets, really, when it comes down to the brass tacks of what students can actually afford. If they can afford to go to PBSA, they can go and enjoy all these on-site gyms and cinema rooms and roof terraces and 24/7 maintenance and, you know, residential life programs and all that great stuff that you get within those, you know. But the hard fact of it is a lot of these students can't afford that, so they need a different type of accommodation, and that's not, as I say, that's not PBSA's problem to solve. That's a broader issue around the lack of housing in this country, and, you know, and that goes back to central government, doesn't it, ultimately, and local authorities. You know, universities, I think, have a much stronger position to, you know, they should be playing their hand much more strongly in what they do, you know, talking to local authorities. And there are some good examples out there of how, you know, universities are now starting to take those conversations to local authorities. But really, you know, central government's the one that needs to get a grasp of this, and they are just not. You know, I mean, they're looking to bring in this Renters Reform Act, which is, you know, Cubo and many other sector organisations can't tell them more directly what the potential consequences of bringing this Renters Reform Bill is going to be on the HMO sector. We've seen it in Scotland. You know, the HMO sector has kind of massively reduced after 2016, when the Scottish government brought in their new tenancy. They're looking to do this very similar thing in England, and, you know, and that the HMO sector, unfortunately, that's where a lot of the students on these lower end budgets they look to go in, because they control their costs more, you know, and they can, you know, 2 to a room or 3 to a room. I don't, you know, they find a way. They shouldn't have to find a way, but they do.
No, and that's probably a good point to bring Martijn in, because I think we can talk a lot about kind of what's happening in the UK, but I know from kind of our recent travels this summer across Europe that it's not just a UK problem in terms of housing. It'd be interesting to hear your viewpoint, Martijn, from kind of the global perspective of people struggling with this housing and where good ideas might be working.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point, because, you know, the student accommodation crisis is, of course, a major topic in all major study destinations. And I hear a lot of these conversations and webinars where people are pointing fingers at, well, the accommodation sector is not doing enough of ABC, or the government should be more flexible and their new law has made things worse, or the education providers, and everyone's pointing their fingers. And what I like here in the Netherlands, where I live, is that the government here, who has also been criticized on many fronts, and let's not talk politics, let's go there, but what they have done is they actually have set up a steering committee with one person. It's called the beautiful Dutch word studentenhuisvestingsregisseur, which is kind of the let's say the director of this project. His responsibility is to actually bring together the stakeholders in international student accommodation. So you've got your PBSA providers, you've got your student housing associations, you've got representatives of public universities and private institutions, student unions, government bodies, local governments, all coming together. And so rather than having these separate conversations with groups of people from the accommodation sector complaining about all the others, or, actually everyone was in the room. And, some interesting solutions come out of that. But my main point here is that it's one thing to talk about, oh, we can't do this or that is so bad. I think as a sector and as stakeholders in the sector, we need to look at ourselves and see what we can do to improve the situation. So obviously we need to be aware of what we cannot do, but it's more interesting to see what can we do and how can we help influence the other areas where we are not that, what we can't do, how can we influence those areas? So my recommendation is really that, actually, like you've done on this webinar, you bring together different stakeholders representing different perspectives in this very important topic.
Thank you. And Simeon, I don't know if you're able to talk a little bit about what you're involved in at the University of Salford as part of the wider kind of Manchester sort of, I guess, housing task force.
So yeah, I suppose you want me to talk about the work we're doing at the Greater Manchester level on housing, right?
Yeah, if you can.
Okay, great. So, well, as we all know, accommodation is a challenge in Manchester, not just in Manchester, but across major cities in the UK. And in my first term as officer, we wanted a Greater Manchester solution to this, and we visited Nottingham to learn from their experience of what a good example of proper planning and coordination between the university and the local community looks like, and how we can also design a similar strategy. So we've also drawn insight from our visits to the Baltics as well, specific reference to the student life strategy at Tempere. Yeah, I would double check that. But mainly, what's happening in Nottingham is a bit of information sharing that would help shape the future of planning in terms of housing provision, availability, cost, safety, other amenities, and just basic issues like noise, sustainability. So we've come back with good insights. Students in Manchester have united, and we formed what we call the Greater Manchester Student Partnership. And we meet about 5 times a year with the Mayor of Manchester. We're the legitimate voice of the students here in Manchester. But early days, some of the outcomes of this is that we've been able to feedback on the good landlord charter consultation, and the mayor has made a commitment in his manifesto to co-create a student living and staying strategy with us. We are working, alongside the universities and the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to write a blueprint for the general public on what students need on housing, safety, and transport in Manchester. Yeah, I don't know if that provides good insight on what we've done at the Greater Manchester level.
No.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's really positive. And it's great to hear. It's great to hear those stories. I know the Nottingham student living strategy quite well. We've done a accommodation strategy group presentation, and we had the unis and the local authority come along talking to the rest of the QBO members about that. Durham's also another really good example of where they've worked very closely with their local authority, and they've managed to pull together a whole broad range of data around the student accommodation supply to try and understand the exactly how many beds they've got across all the different types of accommodation. So not just PBSA, but all the HMOs as well. And they've been able to gather all of that and use that to inform their student number strategy. So there's some really good stuff, and in Bournemouth we are, I've been reaching out. Our local council is currently doing its draft local plan. They have just employed for the first time a PBSA planning officer. So I've met with them. Essentially kind of brought them up to speed on, from the point of view of the 3 universities that are in Bournemouth. There are actually 3 universities in Bournemouth. People don't realise that. So all 3 of the universities have been sort of involved in conversations with that, and we've informed and influenced the policy there. So there is some good stuff here, and this isn't. And going back to kind of Martijn's point around sort of finger pointing, I don't think this is finger pointing. I think this is what you need to do is state the facts of where the problems lie, because if you don't, then you're kind of banging your head against a brick wall, or you just blinkered and you're just trying to And I think that really does, there's a fundamental problem in the UK around the housing strategy, the long-term housing strategy. We've had somewhere in the region 15 or 16 housing ministers since 2010. How can you have a long-term strategy? It's great to hear in the Netherlands that you guys can get together and, you've got a much more collaborative sort of system of government over there. We've got a first past the post, majority-led, 2-party system. That is fundamentally flawed for long-term planning and strategy. If you've got you need collaboration, you need cross-party consensus on things like housing, education, health. We just don't have that. And that's not pointing fingers, that's stating the facts, actually.
I think one thing we've kind of mentioned a lot, and it seems to be global, is that the housing crisis in inverted commas. I mean, from a global perspective, how aware are students globally aware of that, and how is that driving their behaviours regarding booking? Is that driving panic? Should we be looking at more of an organic kind of, less of a cyclical, boom and bust kind of, booking system? What's kind of, I guess, the view that you all have from how international students are behaving when they're booking accommodation? Saurabh, you can probably take the lead on this one.
So first of all, I'm very happy again that now we are all talking about student housing, but it pains that we are talking about housing crisis. So there's no housing crisis. Crisis happens when there's no solution. It's not housing crisis. Of course, there's a yellow journalism happening. All the media been talking about housing crisis, but there's no crisis. There's a solution, and the solution is panel like this. Last week I was speaking in London in one of the panel wherein there were all the ministers in the house. So Robin, you will be happy. There are ministers who are talking about taking a stand on housing crisis, or even post-study visa, or Indian or international students' rights. In UK. So they are aware. Of course, this year is very interesting with elections, and let's not talk about politics, Martin. But that's a fact. So there's no housing crisis, but everyone faced last 2 years that it's real. I mean, I'm the last one to say about this because I was the stupid guy who came in Nottingham back in 2011, didn't book my accommodation, stayed in a hotel. Of course, I'm not complaining now because I'm making a career out of that, but not the right way to do it. You need, as much as you book, take time to apply to universities. Housing needs to be sought out, and that's where education partners, education agents, universities, platform like us, accommodation partners needs to talk about housing. But there's no housing crisis, and it's all across. It's not in UK. Same is in US. Indian students or international students don't know about housing till then they don't get visa. I don't blame them. That's where the education needs to be done. Same thing happened in Australia. I still remember, someone booking accommodation in Melbourne looking for 150, 200 AUD per week. The market prices of 400, 500 AUD. And I don't blame students because nobody talking about housing and nobody telling them that, don't have that unrealistic expectation, because that's where the vested interest of universities and education partners are. But eventually, if collectively we come together, because eventually if a student apply to a university and then he or she struggles for accommodation, they're not coming to that city. We all know what happened to Glasgow, right? So there's no housing crisis. We all need to educate the ecosystem, and these are the ways we can educate. There, you don't need to have lavish parties. We don't need to encourage housing crisis happening in any part of the world. There's no housing crisis. There's a solution. We have been forced. I'm a big evangelist for PBSA, but if if there's a limited PBSA, we need to add HMOs. If student looking for homestay, we need to add homestays. Like if people are looking for flexible contracts, not only fixed contract, we need to add. If we only believe that, okay, this is a solution, and we try to push across the throat that, okay, this is a solution, book it. I mean, either they will not come to that city or they're not coming to that country. Choice is ours. So high time we talk about housing crisis, and there's no housing crisis. Over to you.
I would strongly disagree that obviously there is a student housing crisis as long as we still have students that need to go camping, as long as we have students that need to live under a bridge, as long as students need to sleep on a couch, as long as students need to give up their dream. No, I'll get to where I agree with you.
Amsterdam, yes, but not in UK, not in London, not in Glasgow.
Let's agree to disagree. I think, clearly there is a road to a solution here, but, I guess it starts with, I think the question also starts with that, with being aware that there should at least be transparency to international students about student accommodation issues or opportunities that exist in the different study destinations. I see all too many institutions happily recruit students without considering the fact whether that student will indeed have access to any type of accommodation. Any institution that doesn't offer any type of housing solution, or that doesn't work with any type of housing provider, a booking platform, or worse, even stays muted on the topic of accommodation, well, shame on them, because it's really important that the student is at least aware. And then it's, of course, in the end, it's the choice of the student, as long as they are transparent. But accommodation should be part of any student recruitment process from the very beginning, and transparency. So, so I share your optimism. There are solutions out there, but we're still dealing with a lot of issues that need to be addressed by this industry and the stakeholders all together.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that I think universities have a really prime leading role to play here around providing that information in an accessible way. If they're using agents to recruit overseas, then those agents need to have the right information, and the universities need to be making sure that the agents are using that information in the right way at the right time, so not over promising. And also as well accepting that. And I think actually, from my experience, certainly over the last few years, we've seen definitely universities sort of stepping up and improving the information that they are using, because it's in their best interest ultimately. So I think we're heading in the right direction on that. But also you've got to accept that you're dealing with people who are applying to come to a new country, potentially for the first time. Leaving their families, they're going to be bombarded with information. And picking up on Saurabh's point, we see it all the time. International students coming, they've had all the information sent to them, they've not opened a single email, or if they have, they've not understood the language that we're using in those emails. We're talking about a housing sector that's completely foreign to them, and using terminology that they just don't understand. And we at Bournemouth, we run housing workshops where basically we just invite students in and just take them through everything around explaining what an AST is, explaining that you can't just kind of hand over a property to somebody else, when you move out. And there are all these things, and you hear this stuff around sort of back in my country it works like this, and it's like, we get that. So that people are coming with it's a lot for them to take on board. So I think universities kind of they've got a big job in trying on that journey at some point, trying to sort of make sure that those students kind of get the information they need in the most accessible way. But yeah, it's an ongoing challenge, particularly going back to the cyclical point around that you were making. I think that at the moment, most universities that I'm aware of are going year to year right now. They're forecasting, gone are the days, 10 years ago, again, pre-COVID, a lot of universities would have sort of 10-year student number plans, and they could pretty much, with some confidence say, yeah, that's a trajectory of travel on, right now, I think all of that for a lot of universities has pretty much gone out the window, and they are going year to year right now. And then obviously that has a huge impact on accommodation, because, you know, a couple of years ago, Nigeria was seen as one of the big growth countries. You know, the Naira has completely tanked. The economy is flatlined. All of a sudden, the Nigerian market has dried up, and everyone's going, we plan to bring in X number of Nigerian students. Suddenly they're gone. You know, so you know, the international market is very, you know, you're exposed to lots of different risks as a university, and you can't build a strategy around that.
And Joe, what are you seeing? You're across the globe. What are you seeing around those cycles and the shifting changes across the world?
I think it really does differ by market, by country, and how students behave in terms of when they book, how early or late they book, and I suppose it's a wider question because a lot of factors come into play, such as government policy. If you think about visas for internationals, how long do they take to process? When do they get that certainty that they can actually come in? You know, how are they allowed? Are they allowed to hold rooms until they wait for those visas or not? It really does vary. So, and also whether they're happy to book just online or whether they need to visit, because as we'll all know, Europeans, for example, Southern Europeans will be more likely to visit, whereas internationals from Asia will be predominantly online rather than flying all that way to visit. So you'll get, each market will react differently in terms of the types of bookings they get and when they happen in the cycle. And I'm not sure you can, even from our perspective, how you can plan when a certain cohort from a certain country will book. I think it's very difficult to do that, and it depends on, you know, the level of rebookers and renewals that you have in country as well as to skew the number. So, you know, I said at the start that data is king, and the more information we can get year on year and you know, surveys of this type that you can build upon and start to see trends and what's happening will influence decision making going forward. I think Robin and Martijn's point that they just made, you know, from my perspective, who do international students trust the most? It has to be universities. Has to be. That's where they're enrolling for the course or wish to go to for the course. And Robin said that, you know, universities need to do a lot more in terms of informing international students. We can't make them open emails, or Robin can't make them open emails. That's true, but you know, how do we get through to them? And if we think of PBSA, it's just one option. It's just one option across the many different options that are out there, whether it's HMO, co-living, private sector, BTR, whatever it may be. You know, students don't just live in PBSA. There are other options out there, like, and Saurabh mentioned the point as well. It's just figuring out, are they fit for purpose? And I think, you know, what we all want is a standard where every student feels safe and secure in that home and is able to study properly, and have that space to be able to get their head down and study, as well as, you know, not worry, and, you know, the mental factors come in as well in terms of that pastoral care element and well-being element. So it's a far greater problem than just putting it at PBSA's door, like Martijn said. And that collaborative approach, which Simeon outlined earlier, I think is certainly the way forward. You know, we've seen it in other cities. In Milan, for example, the new, or not new now, but the planners and the mayor that are in place there are really consultative on that, and they talk to the universities, they talk to local businesses. They're looking at how they divide up the city of Milan and where can they put student housing, normal housing, affordable housing, and commercial, and really trying to sort of create a fabric of a city where everything is sort of intertwined. You don't create ghettos of just students only, for example. You know, more of that collaborative approach is really needed moving forward. And, you know, hence why certainly we do, and other PBSA providers are always trying to partner up with universities. And it's not necessarily just about nominations agreements, but it's, you know, offering that awareness of the product that you have that the universities can then pass on to students. Because I'll come back to my first statement, who do the students trust? It's universities.
Simeon, how prepared do you think students are about the options available to them when they're coming to a particular country to study? Guess what? You're on mute again.
Well, for me, I'm really sorry. For me, it's sorry, I just remembered That my mentor will always say, don't say sorry. Yeah, for me, it's fundamentally about looking at the entire student journey and what would mean value for money for students, especially international students that, pay a huge amount of money to get the education here. So for us, the first few weeks of the student journey is really crucial to the entire student experience. If they don't have a good experience within that first few weeks, then, they would not forget. They would always remember. And regardless of what happens later, because, the first few weeks, they get to integrate themselves into the community, find friends, join a club and society, get a part-time job, and that cycle of the student journey. So the question I usually ask is, imagine traveling to Lagos and you've got nowhere to stay. For us, culturally, it's extreme, very extreme for us. And the work we've done is to get the university to reflect on messaging. Transparency is key. A message like, this is the current housing situation in X city or Y city, and this is what you need to do to get a space, or, these are the spaces available, and this is what you need to do. In terms of readiness from their home country, as you know, international students would need a different level of support to, that pre-arrival support, at the start of the relationship until they arrive, until they integrate to their studies. They need a different level of support. So, for example, if the communication is not right, there's a lot of accommodation scam going on. A lot of money is lost in that. And any student that loses a huge amount of money to scammers would not forget. That would be like a turnaround in their experience in a negative way. So for us, it's about transparency, communication to international students, and some level of resourcing and responsibility from the university, specifically for accommodation for international students. So, for example, I don't know if it's Scotland, I don't know if it's in Scotland, where the government has a certain level of response, not the government, but it's a policy that the university has a certain level of responsibility for housing international students, because you're sponsoring the student, and they need that extra layer of support to be able to settle in, to have a good experience. 10 years ago, it was different from what I heard. International students arrive and they are put in student accommodations. Now it's changed. It's a different story totally. So yeah, that's my view.
Thank you, Simeon. There is a comment really in the Q&A box about that quite often students are only told very, very late on that they've got a place at their university. So I guess from their point of view, the kind of the mechanism of booking accommodation probably comes into their mind quite late, because they haven't been given a secure place at university. We're not going to solve that problem on this webinar, but it's an interesting point, and it comes back to that joined up approach, really, that collaboration, that understanding the relationship that universities have with accommodation, with the wider city as well. And from what we've heard so far, it does sound very much like there are some really positive conversations starting to happen citywide. So if we were to have this same webinar in in a few years, we would hope that things have improved massively for international students.
Could I just make one point on that, Sarah?
Robert?
I know we're nearly at time. I think again, just about collaboration, you're absolutely right. I think there's an open goal for universities and PBSA to work together, regardless of whether there's nominations or leases in place, direct lets as well. As a university, the PBSA are right there. They're in your city. Your students are in them. Go and talk to them and develop a relationship with them. You don't have to have a nominations agreement or a lease with them. You can do this with direct let. They're your students. You should work with the PBSA, and PBSA operators, they need to reciprocate. and give their site teams the space and time to be able to develop those relationships and not just bombard them, telling them to sell all the time. So there's a bit of give and take. There's two things that universities and PBSA need to do. The big problem is the students who don't live in PBSA. Where do they live? And there's a big problem, students who go and live in different cities and commute because they've got friends and family. They're the students who are out there and not benefiting from these kind of residential life programs, wellbeing support that the PBSA and the universities can offer in partnership with each other. That's the big area of kind of concern for me, is where those students are and what kind of experiences they're having.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really, really good point. Thank you for raising that. As Robin said, we are out of time. It was an amazing discussion. Thank you to our panelists and everybody who listened. We hope that the points that have been raised here is just the start, really. For us, certainly with the report that we've produced in partnership with Yugo and University Living, it's the start of a conversation, and we didn't solve any issues today, but we certainly started the conversation. So we hope that you take these away to your peers within your own organisations, and hopefully when you receive the report very shortly, it will add to those considerations as well. The report will be sent to everybody who registered for this webinar, and there's also a link that has been posted in our chat, so you can share the link with anybody that hasn't registered so that they get it as well. It's a free report. We've created it to add value to the shared living landscape, so we'd love to know what you think once you've digested it.
Finally, a big thank you to our partners, Yugo and University Living, for sharing our vision and helping to bring this free research to the sector. We really appreciate your help in making it happen, and I'm pretty sure the sector will, and everyone that's watched will, so a really big thank you to that. As marketers, we do believe that you can't communicate your product to your audience if you don't really understand what they're thinking, feeling and doing. And the product can't evolve in the right way if you aren't engaging with your customers along the way and consulting with them. And that's for us where the strategists come from in the Property Marketing Strategists. It's about the who, the what, the why, the where and the when. And we hope that we can continue to have these discussions and work with many of you and help the sector to collaborate, because I think that is a really key point, and one that is only going to be the way that we solve the crisis, or not crisis, however we want to view it. So thank you for those who value the insight we provide to the sector, and we look forward to seeing you all next time, and thank you so much for joining us.